What do you believe you're doing around here? I'm standing by for my property agent. People can afford this residence don't normally real situation.
The bodycam recording would eventually reveal everything. A black gentleman in a professional suit positioned outside a $5 million waterfront mansion. A police officer walking up with aggression already in his tone. And 9 minutes of the most obvious racism ever recorded on police footage in Hennepin County, Minnesota. What Officer Brad Mitchell failed to realize was that he had just approached Dr. James Patterson, a brain surgeon who earned $847,000 annually and possessed more real estate in that community than most of the white residents who lived there. He also failed to realize that Dr. Patterson's spouse was inside the property, alongside the real estate agent filming everything on her phone through the glass. In under 15 minutes, this interaction would conclude with hand restraints, a gathering of neighbors, and a policing career that was about to be ruined so completely that it would become a textbook example of how not to perform as a police officer. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, leave a comment and mention where you're watching from, and press that subscribe button, because what occurs next is completely unbelievable. Believe me, you need to witness how this unfolds. Dr. James Patterson was 41 years old and had dedicated his whole life to reach where he was. Born in South Minneapolis to a single parent who worked 2 occupations, James had watched his mother struggle to cover rent in neighborhoods where gunfire was common background sound. He remembered wearing identical shoes until they developed holes because replacements weren't financially possible. But James was exceptionally intelligent. Scholarship into the University of Minnesota, complete scholarship to Johns Hopkins Medical School, residency at Mayo Clinic, fellowship in pediatric brain surgery at Boston Children's Hospital. He had performed surgery on over 200 children with brain cancers, aneurysms, and spine disorders. He had preserved lives that other surgeons said were beyond saving. 3 years earlier, James and his spouse Monica had relocated back to Minnesota. Monica was a corporate lawyer who had just become partner at one of Minneapolis's leading law firms. Combined, they earned far beyond $1 million annually. They had worked tirelessly. They had earned every asset they possessed, and they wanted to appreciate it. They already owned their main residence, a gorgeous property in Edina valued at $1.8 million. They owned a holiday condominium in Arizona. They owned a rental home near the University of Minnesota that generated steady revenue. And now they were considering a 4th home, a breathtaking lakefront property in Wayzata that they planned to utilize as a weekend getaway. The house rested on Lake Minnetonka with 200 feet of private waterfront, 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, professional kitchen, home cinema, wine cellar. The listed price was $5 million. James and Monica were ready to pay fully in cash. On this specific Saturday morning in June, they had arranged a private showing with their property agent, Susan Chin. Susan had been collaborating with them for months and understood precisely what they wanted. When she contacted them to say she had located the perfect home, they cleared their calendars instantly. James arrived at the residence at 10:45 a.m., 15 minutes ahead. He was dressed in a charcoal gray suit with a sharp white shirt, no tie since it was weekend, and Italian leather shoes that cost more than most individuals' monthly rent. He appeared exactly like what he was, a prosperous professional with wealth to spend. The house existed in a neighborhood that was 94% white with an average household income of $180,000. Gorgeous tree-lined streets, perfectly maintained lawns, the type of community where residents drove luxury vehicles and sent their children to private academies. James parked his black Mercedes S-Class in the driveway and stepped out. The house was stunning, even from outside. Stone and cedar exterior, massive windows overlooking the lake. Landscaping that likely cost $50,000 alone. He could already picture drinking coffee on that deck on Sunday mornings. Susan hadn't arrived yet. James checked his watch. Still 10 minutes early, he walked toward the front entrance to observe the details of the stone design. Incredible craftsmanship. He pulled out his phone to capture several pictures to send to Monica, who was running late from a morning fitness session. That's when he spotted the police cruiser slowing along the street. Officer Brad Mitchell was 36 years old and had worked with the Wayzata Police Department for 9 years. He was white blonde, with the type of physique that suggested he spent extensive time at the gym. Brad had grown up in Wayzata, graduated from Wayzata High School, and never truly moved away. His father had been an officer. His grandfather had been an officer. It was the family profession. Brad had a specific perception of his town. He viewed himself as defending it, keeping it secure, preserving it the way it had always existed, the way it should remain. And in Brad's thinking, that meant keeping certain individuals out. In 9 years, Brad had conducted 284 stops or detainments. 81% of them involved people of color in a town where people of color represented less than 6% of the population. Brad would have insisted he was simply skilled at identifying criminals. The truth was different. Brad saw a black face and assumed wrongdoing. He had been disciplined twice for excessive force violations, 5 official complaints for racist conduct. All had been resolved quietly, hidden away, never affecting his career in any serious way. The department knew Brad was an issue. They simply didn't care enough to address it. On this Saturday morning, Brad was patrolling through one of the wealthy neighborhoods near the lake when he noticed James standing outside the expensive house. Brad didn't see a man in a business suit. He saw a black man in a white neighborhood. And in Brad's mind, that meant one thing. He didn't belong there. Brad drove his cruiser into the driveway, blocking James' Mercedes. He exited, his hand already resting on his service weapon. His posture was aggressive from the beginning. Shoulders back, chest forward, the type of stance meant to intimidate. "Hey, what do you think you're doing here?" Brad's voice was loud, hostile before he was even within normal conversation range. James turned, initially puzzled. Then he saw the officer's face, the posture, and understood immediately what was happening. He had experienced versions of this his entire life, but never this direct. "I'm waiting for my real estate agent. I'm touring this property." James kept his tone calm and professional. His hands were visible, holding only his phone. Brad looked at James' suit, his expensive watch, his polished shoes, and none of it registered. All Brad noticed was skin tone. "Right, sure. Let me guess. You're house hunting in this neighborhood." The sarcasm was obvious, the mockery clear even without Brad making the gesture. James felt anger rising, but kept it controlled. 2 decades of dealing with people's prejudice had taught him to remain composed. "Actually, I already own 3 properties. This would be my 4th. Brad actually laughed. A harsh, dismissive sound that made it clear he believed James was lying. "Haha. People who can afford this property don't usually resemble you. So, I'll need you to explain what your real situation." The words lingered in the air. The implication was completely obvious. People who resembled James, black individuals, couldn't possibly afford a $5 million property. In Brad's thinking, James had to be lying. Had to be involved in something illegal, because wealthy black people simply didn't exist in his worldview. "My real situation," James repeated, his tone tight with restrained anger. "My real situation is that I'm a neurosurgeon. I earn over $800,000 annually. My wife is partner at a major law firm. We own our main residence outright, plus 2 investment properties. We're paying cash for this house. That's my real situation." Officer Brad's expression didn't change. He still didn't believe it. Or more precisely, he refused to accept it. "Sure you are, doctor," he said the title with mocking emphasis. "And I'm the president. Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but this neighborhood doesn't need your kind lowering property values. So why don't you leave before I check you for warrants?" There was your kind. The mask falling completely. James couldn't believe what he was hearing. In 2024, in a supposedly progressive city, a cop had just said, "You're kind," like it was 1964. "My kind?" James' voice was stronger now. "You want to clarify what you mean by that, officer?" Brad stepped closer, invading James' personal space. "You know exactly what I mean. I've been a cop here for 9 years. I know who belongs in this neighborhood and who doesn't, and you don't belong here. I'm looking at a house. That's not illegal." Brad's face twisted into something ugly. "You're casing houses? More likely. What's your plan?" "Return tonight when residents are asleep. This is a good neighborhood. We don't have crime here, and I'm going to make sure it stays that way." James pulled out his phone and began recording. Brad noticed immediately, and his face flushed red with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" "I'm documenting this interaction. I have full legal right to record a police officer in public. Put that phone away, or I'll arrest you for obstruction." "Recording isn't obstruction. That's clearly established law. I'm not interfering with anything. I'm standing on private property with permission, waiting for my real estate agent." Brad's hand moved toward his handcuffs. "I said put it away, and I'm declining. You need to step back, officer. You're harassing me. I haven't committed any crime. I haven't violated any law. I'm waiting to view a house that I can easily afford to purchase. What is the actual issue here? Have you ever been bothered simply for existing in a specific location?" Type yes or no in the comments. Let's discuss it. The actual issue, Brad said, his tone filled with contempt, is that people like you believe you can simply relocate wherever you want. This is our neighborhood. We built this. We don't need, he paused, searching for words, urban element coming in here. Urban element. James couldn't stop himself. He released a bitter laugh. Wow, you're really dedicated to the racism, aren't you? Can't even hide it slightly. Brad's face became even redder. I'm not racist. I'm realistic. Look at crime statistics. Look at what occurs when neighborhoods change. Property values decline. Crime increases. I'm protecting the people who actually live here. I'm about to be someone who lives here, or close by at least. I'm purchasing this house. Cash. $2.3 million. How many people in this neighborhood can say they paid cash for their house? Brad didn't believe him. He couldn't allow himself to believe it. Because if James was telling truth, then everything Brad believed about who belonged and who didn't was wrong. And Brad couldn't accept that. I'm going to need to see identification. And I want to know where you actually live. What you actually do, because I'm not believing this story. Why? Because I'm black. That's literally the only reason you stopped to speak to me. You saw a black man in a suit standing outside a nice house and decided it must be criminal. Do you stop every white person you see examining houses? That's different. How? Explain to me how that's different. Brad couldn't. He had no explanation that didn't involve admitting his own racism. So, he did what officers like him often do when they're exposed. He escalated. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. For what? What crime am I being arrested for? Trespassing. Suspicious activity. Failure to provide identification. I told you I'm here with permission to view the property. Suspicious isn't a crime. And I don't have to provide identification unless you have reasonable suspicion of a specific crime, which you don't. Brad pulled out his handcuffs. I'm not debating with you. Turn around now. That's when Monica arrived. She had been sitting in her car down the street, observing everything through the window, recording on her phone. She had heard enough. She stepped out of her car and began walking toward them. Her phone raised high, camera pointed directly at Brad. Excuse me, officer. What exactly is happening here? Monica's voice was steady and authoritative. She was wearing exercise clothing, but her posture and tone made it clear she wasn't someone to be ignored. Brad turned, saw another black person, and his expression showed exactly what he thought. Ma'am, step back. This doesn't involve you. This is my husband. This absolutely involves me. And I've been recording everything from my car, every word you've said, every threat you've made. I'm an attorney, by the way. Civil rights law. This is literally what I do professionally. Brad's confidence flickered. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Still, he held the handcuffs. Ma'am, your husband is being detained for investigation. Investigation of what? Monica stepped closer. Be specific. What crime do you suspect him of committing trespassing on property, where he has permission to be? We're meeting our real estate agent here, Susan Chun from Coldwell Banker. You can contact her right now and verify, or you can check the lockbox code on the door, which we have, or you can examine my husband's bank statement showing he has the funds to purchase this property. Which would you prefer? Brad said nothing. He was trapped and starting to understand it. Susan Chin pulled up in her car at that exact moment. She stepped out, saw the police officer with handcuffs out, and her face turned pale. Oh my God, what's happening? Susan, perfect timing. Monica said, can you please explain to this officer that we have an appointment to view this property? Susan looked at Brad, then at James. Yes, absolutely. Dr. and Mrs. Patterson are my clients. We have a scheduled viewing at 11 a.m. They're pre-approved for financing, though they're paying cash. Is there an issue, officer? Brad stood there, handcuffs still in his hand, looking at three people who had just destroyed every justification he had attempted to use. No issue, he finally said. He placed the handcuffs back on his belt, just checking on suspicious activity reported in the area. There was no report. Monica's voice was ice cold. You're lying. You saw my husband made assumptions based on his race and decided to harass him. All of which is on camera, both of our cameras and your body camera. I was doing my job. Your job is to violate people's civil rights. Your job is to tell black people they don't belong in certain neighborhoods. Your job is to threaten arrest for the crime of looking at a house. Brad's face was bright red. Now, part anger, part embarrassment, part fear. Ma'am, I don't have to stand here and be lectured. No, you don't. You can leave. You can return to the station and explain to your supervisor why you're about to be named in a federal lawsuit. That's your choice. Brad looked at James one more time. The contempt was still there in his eyes, barely hidden. You folks have a nice day, he said, the words twisted with sarcasm. He walked back to his cruiser and drove away, but not before his body camera captured him muttering under his breath. People think they own the place. The camera captured it. Monica's phone captured it. Susan's shocked expression captured it. Everything was documented. James released a long breath. Susan was apologizing repeatedly. Monica was already on her phone, contacting their attorney. And somewhere across town, Officer Brad Mitchell was about to learn that his casual racism had finally caught up with him. Do you think this officer will actually face consequences? Tell me what you think should happen to him. James and Monica didn't view the house that day. They were too shaken, too angry. Susan understood completely. She offered to show them other properties, but Monica had a different plan. We're buying this house, Monica said. We're paying the asking price. No negotiation. We're closing as fast as possible, and we're moving in because I'll be damned if that racist cop thinks he scared us away. James agreed. They made the offer that afternoon. The sellers accepted. They closed 30 days later, paying $5 million in cash. And when they moved in, they made sure to introduce themselves to every neighbor on the street. Some were welcoming, some were cold, but everyone knew that the Pattersons had arrived and weren't leaving. But before any of that, there was the matter of Brad Mitchell. Monica posted her video to Twitter that same afternoon. By evening, it had 50,000 views. By the next morning, it had 2 million. Local news picked it up, then national news. By Monday afternoon, CNN was running segments on it. The Washington Post wrote an article. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune placed it on the front page. The video was damning. Brad's voice clearly saying, "You're kind," an urban element. His threat to arrest James for trespassing when James had permission to be there. His complete disregard for both James and Monica's explanations. And at the end, that muttered comment about people. The Wayzata Police Department released a statement calling the incident concerning and promising a full investigation. The mayor held a press conference apologizing to the Patterson family. The police chief looked physically ill as he watched the video during a city council meeting. But apologies weren't enough. Not this time. Not with this much evidence. Not with this level of public outrage. Monica filed a federal civil rights lawsuit within a week. The complaint was 52 pages long and cited 89 different cases. It alleged racial profiling, unlawful detention, violation of First Amendment rights for threatening to arrest James for recording, violation of Fourth Amendment rights for detaining him without reasonable suspicion, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and municipal liability for failing to properly train and supervise Brad despite multiple prior complaints. The legal team also subpoenaed all of Brad's personnel records, all complaints filed against him, all body camera footage from his previous stops, and all training records related to racial bias. What they discovered was explosive. Brad had received 5 formal complaints about racist behavior in 9 years. One involved calling a black teenager a thug during a traffic stop. Another involved telling a Latino family that they needed to go back where they came from. A third involved searching a black man's car without consent or probable cause while making comments about drugs and crime. All 5 complaints had been investigated internally and marked as unfounded or unsubstantiated. But the body camera footage told a different story. Brad had a pattern. When he stopped white people, he was professional, polite, quick. When he stopped people of color, he was aggressive, suspicious, likely to extend the stop and search for any minor violation to justify an arrest. His own body camera footage showed him using racially coded language repeatedly. Urban thugs, those people, you're kind. He thought he was being subtle. He wasn't. The internal affairs investigation lasted 3 weeks. They interviewed Brad multiple times. He maintained that he had done nothing wrong, that he was simply doing his job, that people were too sensitive nowadays. He claimed James looked suspicious. He couldn't explain what was suspicious about a man in an expensive suit standing outside a house in daylight. He just knew it when he saw it. The investigator asked him directly, if Dr. Patterson had been white, would you have stopped to question him? Brad hesitated, then said probably not. That was all they needed. The findings were released in a public report. Officer Brad Mitchell engaged in racial profiling when he approached Dr. James Patterson. Officer Mitchell demonstrated bias through his language and behavior. Officer Mitchell detained Dr. Patterson without reasonable suspicion of any crime. Officer Mitchell threatened unlawful arrest. Officer Mitchell has shown a pattern of discriminatory policing throughout his career. Officer Mitchell's prior complaints were not properly investigated or addressed. The recommendation was immediate termination. The police chief accepted it. Brad Mitchell was fired from the Wayzata Police Department 24 days after he told a neurosurgeon that his kind didn't belong in that neighborhood. But the consequences didn't end there. The lawsuit moved forward. The city attempted to settle quickly, but Monica refused anything less than a full admission of wrongdoing and significant damages. The city's lawyers examined the evidence and realized they had no defense. The video was too clear. Brad's own words condemned him. His pattern of behavior was documented in his own body camera footage. They settled for $750,000. But more important than the money were the additional terms. Mandatory anti-bias training for all Wayzata police officers. Minimum 120 hours. Implementation of an early warning system that would flag officers with patterns of complaints or disproportionate stop rates. Requirement that all complaints of racial bias be investigated by an independent third party, not internal affairs. Creation of a civilian oversight board with authority to review officer conduct and recommend discipline. Public quarterly reports on police stops broken down by race. Personal liability insurance requirement for all officers. Termination of any officer found to have engaged in racial profiling. The city had no option but to agree. The video had made them a national embarrassment. The mayor was facing recall efforts. The police chief was under intense scrutiny. They needed to demonstrate they were taking this seriously. Brad, meanwhile, was finished in law enforcement. No department would hire him. The video was too public. The racial slurs were too clear. His personnel file was radioactive. He tried to argue wrongful termination through his union. The union reviewed the evidence and declined to pursue it. They told him he was on his own. He had said the quiet part aloud and gotten caught. There was nothing they could do. Brad eventually relocated out of state. He accepted a job in private security in Arizona, earning a fraction of what he earned as an officer. He told people he was forced out by political correctness, that he was a victim of reverse discrimination. He never admitted that he had racially profiled someone, never apologized to James or Monica, never accepted any responsibility for his behavior. Some online communities supported him. They called him a hero for standing up to woke culture. They donated money to his legal fund. They shared his story as an example of good officers being destroyed by the system. But most people viewed it differently. Most people watched the video and saw a racist officer receiving exactly what he deserved. James and Monica moved into their lakefront home 2 months after the incident. They renovated it extensively, adding a home office for James where he could review surgical cases and a law library for Monica where she could work on civil rights cases. The home became a gathering place. They hosted fundraisers for racial justice organizations. They invited community leaders to discuss police reform. They opened their home to young black professionals, showing them that they belonged in spaces like this, that they had earned the right to be there. Their neighbors had mixed reactions. Some welcomed them warmly. Others kept their distance. A few made it clear they weren't happy about the Pattersons moving in. Property values haven't declined, though, despite Brad's predictions. In fact, the neighborhood is doing just fine. James continues his work as a neurosurgeon. He's now chief of pediatric neurosurgery at the University of Minnesota Medical Center. He's trained dozens of young surgeons. He's published research that has changed treatment protocols for childhood brain tumors. He's saved hundreds of lives. Monica left her corporate law firm to launch her own practice focusing exclusively on civil rights cases. She represents people who have been discriminated against by police, landlords, employers, schools. She's won significant settlements in 17 cases. She's become one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in Minnesota. They've used their platform to push for change. James speaks at medical conferences about the intersection of healthcare and racial justice. Monica testifies before legislative committees about police reform. Together, they've become advocates not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Their story became a case study. Police academies show the video as an example of what not to do. Law schools use the case to teach about civil rights litigation. Diversity trainers reference it when discussing implicit bias. The Patterson case, as it became known, is now shorthand for blatant racial profiling captured on camera. The Wayzata Police Department implemented all the required reforms. Stop data shows that racial disparities have decreased, though they haven't disappeared entirely. 2 other officers were flagged by the early warning system and placed on administrative duty pending retraining. The Civilian Oversight Board has reviewed 43 complaints and recommended discipline in 12 cases. The city is different now. Not perfect, not even close, but better, more accountable, more aware, and all because one officer couldn't hide his racism when confronted with a black man who dared to be successful in a white neighborhood. The house itself became symbolic. When James and Monica host gatherings there, they make a point of telling the story, not to dwell on the trauma, but to remember why the fight matters. To show young people that you can be harassed, threatened, and discriminated against and still succeed, still thrive, still belong. Brad Mitchell said that James and his kind would lower property values. He said urban elements didn't belong in that neighborhood. He said he was protecting what his community had built. But James and Monica didn't lower anything. They elevated it. They brought intelligence, success, and grace to a neighborhood that desperately needed it. They show that belonging isn't about skin color. It's about character. It's about contribution. It's about refusing to accept someone else's bigotry as reality. Brad Mitchell is working security at a mall in Arizona. Still bitter, still convinced he did nothing wrong. James Patterson is saving children's lives. Monica Patterson is fighting for justice in courtrooms across the state. And their lakefront home stands as a monument to the idea that racists don't get to decide who belongs where. This story matters because it shows that racism isn't always subtle. Sometimes it's an officer saying you're kind directly to your face. Sometimes it's being told you don't belong in a neighborhood you can easily afford. Sometimes it's being threatened with arrest for the crime of being black in a space white people have claimed as their own. But the story also shows that documentation matters. Monica's video, Brad's body camera, Susan's testimony, all of it created a record that couldn't be denied or dismissed. It forced accountability in a system that usually protects its own. 1 officer, 1 racist encounter, 2 videos, and an entire police department had to reform its practices. Brad Mitchell thought his badge gave him the authority to decide who belonged in his town. He thought he could intimidate a black man into leaving. He thought no one would challenge his authority. He was wrong about all of it, and that mistake cost him his career, his reputation, and any chance he had of being remembered as anything other than the racist cop who got exposed on camera. James and Monica are still there, still thriving, still refusing to be intimidated, still belonging in a place that someone tried to tell them wasn't theirs. And that might be the best revenge of all. Thanks for watching this story all the way through. If this connected with you, hit that subscribe button. I share stories like this that deserve to be told. Leave a comment and tell me, have you ever been told you don't belong somewhere because of who you are? Let's discuss it in the comments.